I want to, first of all, make sure that we don't overwhelm people, because a lot of people would not really have any idea of what we mean by artificial intelligence. And it took me a while to figure out what it was and how it was influencing us. And there's so much written about this that I want to tell you before we start that I'm not working on behalf of corporations to try to tell you where this is going, although we may have a quote or two on it. Neither am I trying to persuade you to use it. What we want to do is to look at how this interfaces with us as Bible students. So that narrows the subject, but it gives us a focus, which I think is the only real focus we should have when we're talking about these things. The folly of artificial intelligence. Well, now you can see from the first screen and the duplicate here that there's a lot of things about you just driving here and me even using this thing here. It's all related to artificial intelligence. I press a button and something happens. There's nobody up there that's working that machine. There's nobody in the back room that's causing these things and creating them. It's all done, as we would say, artificially, and we'll give you a definition of that in time. So the areas of interest to be presented this evening are, we want to first of all just introduce it, make sure you have some feel for it. We want to show you how it's related to an increase of knowledge, which for Bible students has a Bible ring to it. We want to look at the driving forces behind AI, because that really helps you when you see where it's getting its push from or its pull from. We certainly want to identify the conflict that it will have for us. We want to introduce you to Anthony. We want to show you some red lines about this subject, which I think are really quite necessary for us. And then I want to get back to how this relates to the parable of the 10 virgins, but we will not be able to do that completely because of just the time limitations of this. So I'm promising myself that I would not speak too long on any one of these slides so we can get through this in a reasonable time. So as an introduction, you probably have seen many graphs like this and thought, well, that's just a graphic artist at work, just drawing things for us to look at. But no, it's got a message. And if you look at the face is really not human. It looks like human. But that's artificial intelligence. It's not real, it's artificial. So let's look at our definitions to make sure that we get this right from the start. So where would you look for a definition of artificial intelligence? But look for someone or some corporation that's using it. And I thought IBM had pretty well the best quote. It's artificial intelligence, or AI. Now, we'll be using that abbreviation quite a bit tonight, so try to remember that's what I mean. Artificial intelligence is technology that enables computers and machines to simulate human intelligence and problem-solving capabilities. So when you looked at your car, or you think of your car dashboard, and you think that the car's telling you what the temperature is outside. Well, that's because there's a little machine, a little sensor that's measuring what the temperature is and then relating it to you so you can keep track of it. But if you just thought for a moment, how many other things on your car dashboard are telling you how the car's doing and how your trip's going? All artificial intelligence. As they rightly say, it's a technology that enables computers and machines to simulate human intelligence. I remember as a very much younger person, back when my dad brought the first television into our home when I was a child, and I could not figure out how there was a face on the front of this box. And I really wanted to have a little sneak inside and see if there really was a head in there. Some way to account for this, because there was no background, there was no technology that was explained to us. And I don't want that to be the way you see this subject tonight. So you've got to remember, it's technology that enables computers or machines to simulate human intelligence. But Bible students need to know that real intelligence was created by Yahweh, the God of the Bible, and for his glory. That's what Bible students would do. You always compare it with what our God's standard is. But artificial intelligence was created by people for their glory. Now, you really want to remember that. We live in a world where the things that have been created were for our God's glory. This is created for man, for his glory. And that's what they speak about it. Many times it's what they're doing, how wonderful it is, and how in time it will surpass human intelligence. At least that's what they think will happen. Now, why do we call it folly? And I want to clarify that right up front. The folly of artificial intelligence. Because for Bible students, it's obvious when you compare it to the intelligence of God. Like, why would they even choose that term, artificial intelligence? When you read 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 18 and 19-20, it says, "Let no man deceive himself. If any man among you seem to be wise in this world, let him become a fool, that he may be wise. For the wisdom of this world is foolishness with God." That's a pretty blanket statement. For it is written, "He taketh the wise in their own craftiness." And again, "The Lord knoweth the thoughts of the wise, that they are vain." So when God looks at the very smartest person in the world, he sees that as just being foolish compared to the wisdom that he has. Now, you can mess that up. If you look long enough at human attempts to develop artificial intelligence, you might be so wowed by it that you forget that comparison. As far as God's concerned, all of that put together and wherever they think it's going is just foolishness with God. So that's a little hard sell when you come to people who don't know anything about their Bible. But for Bible students, it's not at all. We often compare the wisdom of man to the wisdom of God, and it's like comparing a little ant with an elephant. It's hardly a comparison at all. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about, in this next section, an increase of knowledge. Now, you think a little bit, because a lot of us here are old enough to think about what people knew about certain things when they were first able to assess it as a child, and what they're able to do now. From people my age, I'm sure that we would all agree it's beyond anything we thought would happen. When we see the number of different technologies that have come online, in particular now with computers. So that curve, for people who have taken the mathematics to know and understand what that curve represents, is this curve. It's called an exponential growth curve. And the world population always is growing exponentially. So if you look at the bottom part of the graph and you see it starts at 1 and goes to 2000, you're looking at year 1 and you're looking at year 2000. So if we go back to when there was just a very, very few people, in fact, you see it's not really on 1, it's a little bit above that population, but it took Adam and Eve a while to have children. It took their children a while to have children. And even then, the population was just barely moving. And that's how the population grew. It was very, very slowly growing over, 1,500, 1,600 years. It's the first mark we got there for a year is 16, so it's 1807 or 04. So that is 1,800 years before the population really started to move upwards. But when it started to move upwards, it started to move so fast, it was almost going straight. Now, the problem with exponential growth is when it gets straight. if it could ever be in anything we see, that it actually gets straight. It's going so fast, it's changing so rapidly that we lose the ability to really use it. Now you might think, oh, where would you ever find something like that? Well, I want to show you this because this happened to me while I was teaching at Conestoga College. Now, in the 80s, they were just coming out with computers. I bought my first computer. It was an Apple II Plus, and it couldn't hardly do anything, but it was a bit of a wonder for everybody. Like, what is this thing? Look at what it can do. And it just started to grow and grow and grow. So the leaders of the college decided that what we really need in the college is to have people graduating that know how to repair these things, because everybody's starting to get computers. There's going to be hundreds, if not thousands, of computers that will fail in some way and need to be repaired. So let's get the repairmen started. It took about 2 years to get it going. When the first people came to the program, it took them 2 years before they graduated. And when they graduated, there weren't any jobs, because they didn't know that when these computers came out, the technology was growing so fast, no one wanted to repair their computer. They just bought a new one. And they had to buy a new one because the software that was coming out only matched people who had new computers. We even know that now. That the computers have driven people to buy things where they still have things that worked, but they don't fit the software that's available. If you're in a competitive business format, you've got to be with the latest. But as that curve gets steeper and steeper, it would appear mathematically that nobody could keep up with the rate of change that's taking place. That's exponential curve, as we have learned it in school. Now, I just find that kind of interesting with respect to Daniel chapter 12, the first 4 verses. Now, as Christadelphians, we've often talked about this verse because we believe we're living in that time of this happening. Not that it has happened entirely yet, but we see the beginnings of it. We see the signs of it developing. So Michael shall stand up. Well, the Michael that stands up at this time for Israel is the Lord Jesus Christ. And when he stands up, he will be here. And that great prince, which stands for watch over the sons of the people, there will be a time of trouble such as there never was since there was a nation. And then it goes on to say that many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awaken, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt. Well, that's decidedly at the time of the Lord Jesus Christ's return. Then he goes on to say, those that are wise shall shine like the brightness of the firmament, those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. So there will be a teaching that goes out to the world. And during this period of growth that we talk about in those first 4 verses, he makes this comment without really explaining what is meant. It's left up to us to add to this, the filling out of knowledge shall increase. Now, there couldn't be any of us that could look at what's happened in the last, in our lifetime, that wouldn't be able to say decidedly there has been a tremendous increase in knowledge in the world. People just accumulating knowledge. And with computers, it's just following that curve, that exponential curve. And even then, they're having trouble keeping up with getting more and more servers, getting more and more places where the memory is kept so you can get it on all of your computers and your cell phone, etc. All of these things are things that we are witnessing. So this idea of knowledge increasing, I think we can certainly see that it's involved in this study of AI, because artificial intelligence, machines working with people, has been one of the biggest factors relating to that increase in knowledge. So I'd like to look a little at the driving forces behind AI, although with a train, it doesn't always have the train behind the engine. train can be in front of the engine. It can pull or push. And sometimes we have to decide if it's significant, which way it is. Well, look at these quotes as they start to shape our ideas from the world about AI. So this is just one of many quotes that we can find out there, and I do acknowledge that some of them have it a little differently than this particular one. Can perform an intellectual task that a human can, possessing the ability to understand, learn, and apply knowledge across various domains, e.g., writing novels, composing music, solving complex mathematical problems. AGI aims to replicate human intelligence, a goal that has driven researchers since the early days of AI research. Now, AGI is just a more elevated and a broad aim that they have with artificial intelligence. Imagine that as the aim, though. See, that's something that Bible students could be totally unaware of, that where this is going in the eyes of the people who are working every day on it is to replicate human intelligence. And think of what they could do if they did, or what they're doing now because they've got close to that. Going on in that article, it says, the history of artificial intelligence is a story of human ingenuity, perseverance, and the relentless pursuit of knowledge. From the early days of artificial intelligence research to the cutting-edge advancements of today, we've witnessed the birth of a new era, one where machines and humans work side by side to solve the world's greatest challenges. As we look to the future, we can only imagine the incredible possibilities that await us as we continue to push the boundaries of artificial intelligence. Well, it may be in the minds of some of you just linking that already to the Tower of Babel, because that's so similar to what God saw them doing. They were trying to do something that God said, I don't want you doing that. That's not my purpose with it, or with you. And yet what they're trying to do is develop new possibilities that await people who are working on this system of using machines and people together. But Bible students, don't forget this. A driving force behind many things, hopefully not us, but yes, even us at times, is money. And a driving force behind AI is a love of money, I believe. In 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 9 and 10, it says, but they that will be rich fall into temptation and a snare, and into many foolish and hurtful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. For the love of money is the root of all evil, which while some coveted after, they have erred from the faith and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. Now, I found it interesting that phrase, the love of money is the root of all evil, is only found in all the Bibles that I have, in the King James, the Douay Rheims, and the Geneva Bible, which those three Bibles were all written about the same time. Almost every other Bible says it's a root of evil. Now, I don't know enough Greek to argue that. But I want to tell you there's a big difference between saying it is the root of evil and it is a root of evil. If you think it's just a root of evil, then there must be other kinds of roots. And if there are other roots, then, if you see something like AI, why did you even care to look at it? Because it may or may not be. But if you see the Bible telling you that the love of money is the root of all evil, you look for it. Where is money driving or pushing AI? That's the question. People love it. $100 bills, $50 bills, $20 bills. Although in today's world, we see less and less of that, and it's just a card, a plastic card. And we see a bill at the end of the month. But that love of money, if you think about it, is found everywhere. So look at how subtly it's found in this quote. Now I've tried to keep these all very up to date. So this one comes to us from the January this year. And this is, someone at the top of Google saying that there was a code red issued for the company. What could pose a challenge to such a huge tech giant? The answer, artificial intelligence. Specifically, an advanced AI chatbot called ChatGPT, a more advanced version of which is GPT-4. Microsoft has now integrated into Bing and Microsoft Edge. ChatGPT and Chat, or GPT-4, are large language models, a type of AI that can give detailed answers to almost any question, including about images you show GPT-4. They can pass high-level exams. They can write, proofread, summarize articles, write poems, computer codes, sermons, a detailed commentary on passages of scripture, translate between languages, play games, and much more. Now, that's a lot of human behavior that's being influenced by AI. And I really thought it's kind of interesting that he would mention sermons, that people just use AI to write their sermons, just like Brother Jake give us an idea of how it's just type a question in and get an answer back. If that ever becomes the normal, brothers and sisters, we are in big trouble. We've got to recognize that, and that is one of the main reasons that I got behind this talk, is because I think that could happen. It's subtle. It happens without you really knowing it. It happens to start with because you really want it. It's helping you. It gets you over a hurdle. But when you look back on it, what did it cost? And sometimes that analysis is something that escapes us on various matters of life, that we work out the costs too late. Now, just think about this. This is artificial intelligence as we see it in the world today. Little bits and pieces of it. You saw little bits and pieces on your car dashboard. You may have certain things of it. What I'm using here is artificial intelligence. You may think of many other things in your life. But think of what it can do. So it can read and summarize articles. It can write for news organizations. It can see, analyze, and decide. It can hear. It can understand. It can speak and converse with humans. It can smell and detect diseases. It can touch and pick raspberries. It can move and drive robots. It can detect human emotions. It can play games with humans and win. It can debate and rebut humans. It can create visual arts and poetry. It can read your human mind. Do you think that's a threat to us as Bible students? Do you think that all of these things put together can change our direction in life? Can take us away from our worship of Yahweh? I think it can. And I think we ought to be very wary of this. And that's one of the things I hope that I can convince you of tonight, is to be wary of it. AI translators, the future of language learning. Now, these are popping up. This is going back to 2019. So it's been quite a few years ago now that they were able to say this. Many people believe that artificial intelligence, AI translators, are surpassing human translators in their ability to accurately translate foreign languages. With the growing popularity of home voice recognition systems like Alexa and apps such as Google Translate, it's easy to see why. The technology is advancing rapidly. This year, a Nigerian man developed the world's first artificial intelligence portal that can translate over 2,000 African languages. This incredible achievement is helping overcome the language barrier in Africa and the rest of the world. Now, I chose the article for a reason, because you see that goes right back to Babel. The people were one, and God wanted to separate them and bring them out from the ideas that they were getting that were wrong in his sight. They weren't going the right way. And now people think we can overcome that by AI helping us to translate things. I saw a little video of that, of a person who was visiting some country overseas. He had his cell phone with him. He typed in what he wanted to get a question he wanted answered. He just moved it towards the person, pressed the button. It read it to her in her language. She listened to it. She replied in her language, and it was translated, so he got the answer in his language. And then it went through several other occurrences of where AI can assist people now. Like, this is growing, brothers and sisters. This is not something we're talking about in the future. It's here, now. And how are we going to react to it? But this is where it gets evil. The title there, the foreign pro-Trump fake news industry has pivoted to American patriotism. A little hard to figure out what they mean by that, but click farmers, they say, especially those from Macedonia. So some group of people in Macedonia have a long history in Facebook. During the 2016 presidential election, teenagers in a small Eastern European country pushed fake news to millions of Americans on Facebook, making tens of thousands of dollars in ad revenue. In 2019, similar Eastern European pages ran the same playbook, this time reaching nearly half of all Americans on the platform. AI has now given those same operations the capacity to produce near infinite volumes of low quality or outright fake news. Now, if you've been watching the news, you must know about fake news, because there's just a lot of it out there. But they don't tell you it's fake news. And neither does there seem to be any penalty for these big media giants to produce it. They allow it. Well, there's no regard for the truth. Christadelphians regard the truth, but other people don't. They think that everybody's truth is okay to publish. That's the world we live in. If we think that our voice is going to, change the world, we've got to think something differently. Going this route, we've got to try to see how we can survive this, because that's quite an attack upon us when we don't know what's right or what's wrong, and we're getting volumes of it pushed at us every day. Now, I see conflict ahead, and I want to just talk about this for a bit. Mankind's history has been filled with this kind of conflict, and it's linked to foolishness. If any of you, I'm sure Uncle Peter would recognize this. This is a refrigerant called R22. It was a refrigerant that was using chemicals that they didn't think would ever cause a problem because they were heavy chemicals. And they thought that if there was any spills of these chemicals or any loss of them, that the molecule was so big it could never get anywhere in the atmosphere, which they were very wrong about, because these molecules did get to the atmosphere until they got to the ozone layer. And when they got to the ozone layer, they interacted with that ozone layer to dissipate it. And so there were ozone holes. And the ultraviolet radiation coming in from the sun was so strong, people were getting cancer. And then they said, maybe it wasn't such a great idea to have this chemical. And they banned it. And it's not that it's totally banned, because systems that we're using are still using it until they're out of service. But it shows society how the wisdom of men, which was seemingly for some real good idea, it was going to illustrate the foolishness of going down that route. People wanted air conditioning, they got it. See, if you look at the open Bible, this is nothing new to you because you're Bible students. But for people that aren't Bible students, they wouldn't know how right God was in saying this. There is a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way of death. Proverbs 14, verse 12. And again, in Proverbs 12, verse 15, the way of a fool is right in his own eyes, but he who heeds counsel is wise. Want another example? Look closely. What do you notice? That first child is writing with a little tiny hand because of the drug thalidomide, which people thought was a miracle drug to help women in the time of pregnancy to overcome morning sickness, but not realizing that it was having an effect on the developing embryo. And in fact, it did produce children with no legs, no arms, or deformed legs and deformed arms. Do you think there was any folly in producing thalidomide and putting it in the market? You see, there's a way that seems right to a man. I think that's the way it is with artificial intelligence. They're looking at, where is this going to go? It's going to be wonderful. Not realizing where its end is going to be. And God tells us that these things that men deem so wise are just foolishness in his sight. You see, if you have a respect for God, you think about it before you go down this road. But the world we live in does not have a respect for God. I don't know how many of you have done a study in geology and have looked at the people that were at work at the time of the formation of the idea of evolution. And you get into these people who told us that, I remember going down to the museum in Toronto and going through it, and in the geology section, it said, the past is the key to the future. And what they meant is, look at the things that you can see in the earth, and you will see how it will happen in the future. Well, how do we explain that? And yet, these people that came out, along with Darwin, to try to tell us about what happened in the past, thought that was the Colorado River that cut that out. Well, for one river to cut that out, and even with the formations on either side at different levels, it would be nigh impossible for anyone to explain it. But certainly not one little river that's at the bottom now to carve that out. That had to be carved out with a huge flood. For Bible students, it's not hard to figure out when there was a huge flood. As you see in Genesis 6, when Yahweh said, I will destroy man for whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast and the creeping thing and the fowls of the air, for it repenteth me that I have made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of Yahweh. So if we have respect for God, we think of God and the way he dealt with people when they did something that was wrong in his sight. In fact, where it got so bad, he decided he was going to destroy all life except what was in the ark. And again, this Tower of Babel that we have here, I just think that the mockery of people for God's word is demonstrated so much in the European Parliament building in Brussels, that they built it like the Tower of Babel and unfinished like the Tower of Babel, and then planted the flags of the nations out front to show how they could undo what God did. And people start to show that. It's very much like the sin of Sodom. When it got to the point that they were prepared to parade their pride, which is interesting, isn't it? Because that's just basically what the Bible says. And today we see people parading their pride. God intervened. We're expecting God to intervene. Bible students see these signs and they say, well, we got to take heed to what God's done before. God is the creator of real intelligence. Man is the creator of artificial intelligence, and there's no comparison when it comes to the quality of the intelligence. Yahweh's plan for Earth's inhabitants is that there will be a kingdom which will, as you see in Daniel 2, verse 44, it will break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms. And this little picture here of, I think, some artwork that someone did, maybe even in form, with, you can see the 6 lions going up to the throne of Solomon on both sides. And I've often thought, when you think about that, of how that throne demanded that the person walk up, start to think seriously as he approached, if he was ever allowed to get right up to the king. God's going to break in pieces these kingdoms, consume them all. That's what he is telling humanity for us today. Now, I want to talk a little bit about Anthony. And you've got to do some thinking here. It's got to be a requirement of this in the lecture. So here we are in Book Road. We advertise out there on the sign, and we know how that sign attracts people. Well, just imagine if one day Anthony came by. Now, if you look at Anthony, he's got a human face, but he's got a metal body. We might have a hard time imagining how you could have a human face on a metal body, but that's what people are aiming to do. They want robots to look just like people. And I was looking at what robots could do, and they can do just about every gymnastic twist and turn that people can do and land on their feet. Like, it's developing, it's getting to better and better all the time. People are working on face structure, trying to make it so that it feels like a human face, looks like a human face, eyes that move, and body or facial expressions that give you something in flavor of what it's saying. So what if Anthony walked in one day to our public address, he'd come back and sat in the back seat, right back by Brother Vaughn back there. And then he said, because we were having a baptism and we were talking about baptism, he noticed this lecture title out there on why you should be baptized. After hearing it, he listened to it. He wanted to be baptized right away. Now, this might seem like, far out thoughts, but where people are going with this is what they would like to think could happen. He knew all of our beliefs, and he could recall them all perfectly and on demand. He knew all the books of the Bible and could recite every book of the Bible perfectly on demand. He knew all of our Christadelphian works and could cite them and give the author, publisher, and page number perfectly. There was never been anybody else that could pass an exam like this voice could pass it. He knew and stated that he rejected all of the false teachings. He knew all those false teachings. And he knew and could explain the commandments of Christ. What more do we ask? Well, we do ask a witness, like, what is your personal life like? Now, just leaving that aside for a bit, what would we say to him after that illustration from him that he could do all those things? And what you have to remember is, going back to the Old Testament, something that God told Israel at a time of stress like this. God may be testing us because the sign or the wonder comes to pass. If there arises, this is Deuteronomy 13, verses 1 to 4, if there arises among you a prophet or a dreamer of dreams, and he gives you a sign or a wonder, and the sign or the wonder comes to pass, of which he spoke to you, saying, let us go after other gods which you have not known, and let us serve them. And you shall not listen to the words of that prophet or that dreamer of dreams. For Yahweh your God is testing you to know whether you love Yahweh your God with all your heart and with all your soul. You shall walk after Yahweh your God and fear him and keep his commandments and obey his voice. You shall serve him and hold fast to him. But they're subtle and the way they come. They're not that clear. So we're being amazed. Look at what this, whatever you want to call him, Anthony, can do. He can do a better job of defending the faith than any of us could. But if we kept on asking him, he could defend the Catholic faith in the same way. You see, you have to start thinking about this is a different situation. I just sorted out 4 things that we might want to think about. If we ever had to face a robot like this who came in and requested baptism, we'd have to think, Anthony isn't alive. Even by medical standards, that's not right. Cross it out. Put it there. Has no heartbeat and is not breathing. Medical standpoint, is not alive. Anthony is not a descendant of Adam. Hence, baptism has no relevance to him, or rather to it. Having never lived, Anthony cannot die. And resurrection has no relevance to it either. Yahweh is not its father. Anthony is a robot, not a man. But it might take a while for us to think of those thoughts. And that's how we have to be on guard in this world when we see artificial intelligence doing wondrous things that we can just marvel at what they're being able to do, and they're being able to do new things and more things every day of our life. Now, this idea of red lines, I don't think that's new to you because most cars today have a red line on the tachometer. And most people know what a red line on the tachometer means, is don't rev your engine beyond that line. And probably best not close to that line, because if you do, you could ruin your engine. And I just happened to be at a particular intersection once, just a couple, probably last year, where there was a man in the car and he was slumped over the steering wheel. The doors were all locked and he had that car floored. He must have put his foot on the accelerator and either was asleep or he was unconscious. People were pounding on the car. They could not get it open. And the car was starting to smoke because it was over the red line. You want to know any more about that after the lecture? But that's red lines. Now, we really need to establish red lines. Not that I really like the idea, of red lines, because the idea of red lines comes basically from Prime Minister Netanyahu from Israel, who stood up in the United Nations and said, "This is our red line. If Iran makes their uranium richer than what's he got on there? 90%, we will intervene. We will not let them get over that enrichment rate." And I guess that red line struck many, many people. But you see, that's the idea of a conscience. We've got to settle ourselves that we will not go over a red line. Each of us, we've got to know that in life. We've got to know that if we've got to be out of the house by 8 o'clock and we've got a lot of things to do, we've got to plan our days so that we can be out of the room at 8 o'clock. That's the important thing that I think we have to, even as children, learn in our life. And it comes out of the idea of conscience in the Bible. But look at this. So a lot of us are using AI already in Bible study. Programs like eSword. Now, I use eSword. So it quickly compares Bible passages in different English translations. Wonderful. You don't have to get out all these English translations. You can just do it on the screen. You can just press a couple buttons and there it is. And the other translation, press another, you see another translation. You can put them all on the screen at once. Wonderful to be able to do that. It finds every reference containing a particular word, phrase, or combination of words in seconds. Think of how long it would take you to do that. If you were looking at a structure of 3 words, wherever they're found in the Bible, 3 words together in sequence, it can do it in seconds. finds every reference to a particular word in Hebrew, Greek, in seconds. Most of us don't know very much about Hebrew or Greek, but it can find it, tell us what the Greek word means, and it's very helpful, giving us an enlightenment of that passage or that word. Then it can find various historical maps of different countries, cities, and places from Bible times in seconds. Have you used it, brethren? Who hasn't used it? Like, it's wonderful. We've all applauded this, but what we can do with it. Where's it going? This is what we got to think about. Because AI is not stopping there. AI will go further. And this is the evil aspect about it. You can see already, at least I can see it in my life. Whether you can see this or not, I don't know. And these are not necessarily in sequence, just a few that I follow off the cuff. It tends to draw us away from the use of just one English translation. And I've noticed that in our ecclesia, and myself, I'm not fingering anybody, this is the way we live. That if there's a version, English version, that seems to be clear on a passage that we agree with, we will cite it in preference to one that doesn't cite it. And over the years, I've noticed that I tend to lose what I had gained as a child in being able to remember the Bible passage, but it was in the King James Version. And now the NIV says it a little bit different, and the ESV a little bit different, and the NET a little bit different. And yet we might choose a different version for another passage. I just think that really harms memory work. And I think we've been wise over the years to keep a King James Version Bible on the platform. Brethren, if we change it, we've got to think about where that will lead us. We are inclined to keep up with the latest innovations and thus become dependent on technology for our Bible study. So in our discussion, someone tells us, do you know what it can do now if you get this particular Bible program? And on and on it goes. So you think, well, that would be helpful. Bible study is prime time. I don't have much of it. What can this help me with? And we tend to be moving with the innovations. I learned that all the way through computers because I had a business. And the business depended upon having a computer that I could take to other colleges and show them what it could do in analyzing their data. And this was just at the start of this wave of computers. But I had to keep up with the innovations because when new things came on, people were expecting you to be able to show these. And it was quite a trip. I see it happening again here. We get caught up in the views of writers who publish rather than the results of personal Bible study. There is no replacement for getting the Bible open yourself and thinking about it and meditating on it and trying to figure out what it's saying and making notes as you go through to get some conclusions. But if you just go to a commentary and it sounds reasonable and write it down, that's been available as long as there's been books on the Bible. But it's getting easier to do it. And you can consult more of these people than we would normally do. I don't think that's helpful. Personal Bible study takes a lot of time, quality time, but it's the one that really works. What I'm worried about is that as Bible students, we could become speechless without the power of electricity. You think of yourself and you have a power outage and you've been doing your Bible study. Now your battery of your computer has a life to save you for a while. But if the battery's dead, you may have a generator out in the garage that can help you for a while. But ultimately, electricity, if it shuts off, what do we got to say? Now, when you see that happening in your life, we ought to be warned about it. Why would we allow electricity to control our knowledge of the Bible and our ability to speak about it? Well, because we let it, because AI has been slowly, subtly entering our life, and we didn't recognize it or do something about it. Now, if we just get back to conclude with the parable of the 10 virgins, I want you to see something in here which I think connects a lot of dots. And it is not the only way to see the parable of the 10 virgins, but it's one way that we hope to expand on a little bit later. And I just want to introduce it now. So you will notice it's pretty simple to follow it. It says, 5 of these 10 virgins, Matthew 25, verse 2, were wise and 5 were foolish. Many people have commented on 5 and 5. How do we divide that up? Do you mean that that's really the way it will be? There'll be 5 foolish, half of them foolish and half of them wise? I don't think any time we see a number in scriptures, we should just roll over it and think, well, that was just made up on the spur of the moment. Don't pay any attention to it. But they that were foolish took their lamps and took no oil with them. And the wise took oil in their vessels with their lamps. So it takes a lot of work to make olive oil for a lamp that runs on oil. You've got to get the olives, you've got to press the olives, you've got to purify the oil, you've got to get enough oil to make it. I mean, that's taking a lot of time besides the work. But this circumnavigates it all. The wise answered, saying, not so, lest there be not enough for us and you, but go rather to them that sell and buy for yourselves. And while they went to buy, the bridegroom came. Now, this idea of buy tells us about a root of evil, or if you like, the root of evil. There is no way you can buy oil that it was meant to spiritually enlighten. It wasn't that the Lord required everybody to have a lamp, because if you didn't all have a lamp, he couldn't see. He's speaking about spiritual enlightenment. And you can see how we can lose spiritual enlightenment by letting AI run our life. Turn off the power. We have no oil, and we're speechless. Like, how many of us could give a talk on a subject if we didn't have any Bible, we didn't have any computer, we didn't have any cell phone, nothing. Just stand up and tell me what you believe. What will you think it'd be like at the judgment seat? Do you think the Lord will allow us to bring our cell phones in and I'd rather read it? Could I read it? Now you got to tell us what you believe without all those attachments that came by AI and through the money route. So there's a lot more to that. That's all I wanted to say about it this time. So the folly of AI will be revealed at the judgment, I believe, if people continue to go down that route. It talks about in Ephesians 1, verse 18, the eyes of your understanding being enlightened. That's the understanding. That's the light that we want to shine in our life. The foolish did not have sufficient oil. They were naked at the judgment seat, in a sense, with no Bible, no computer, no cell phone, and no personal righteousness, because they never did the work. They never allowed their mind to process the oil that was enlightening their mind. AI had assisted their Bible study, but had not built up their understanding of the memory of God's Word. With instant access to Bible knowledge through the use of AI, they had circumvented the enlightening process. Now, that's where I want to leave it tonight. I'd like you to think about that subject, because I think we'll all benefit by just seeing what's happening in this world and being wary, not allowing ourselves to be caught up with its development. Thank you.